Good morning, everybody. Welcome to English Grammar and Language Use. Today we continue our discussion of clauses. So as we said previous times, we're now talking about dependent clauses that are also called subordinate clauses because they cannot stand on their own, but they're dependent on another section or another part of a sentence, meaning an independent clause for it to communicate meaning, but on its own. A subordinate clause is ungrammatical, so it needs something to get attached to attach to. And we also spoke about how there are specific keywords that are used at the beginning of adjective and noun clauses, of dependent clauses, and these are called pronoun words. And so now we're discussing this week. We're discussing adjective clauses, which is a subtype of dependent clause, right? We have noun clauses, which we've already covered, and now we're in adjective clause territory. And we said that a way in which adjective clauses are different from noun clauses is that noun clauses talks about the subject, right, or the object, whereas adjective clauses, they describe a property of the noun or a property of the subject, meaning that adjective clauses can be omitted. They can be optional. They typically give additional information. So last time we spoke about the pronoun words whom, which, and that. And today we're going to continue with this discussion, and we're going to add to that list whose, when, where, and nothing. Okay? So we continue with that. So we said that, okay. So we said last time that adjective clauses can combine with quantifiers, right? And quantifiers are phrases or words that give information about number or quantity. Some of these phrases are listed below. So adjective clauses can combine with quantifiers, and not only that, typically when we see expressions of quantity inside of an adjective clause, they are combined also with a preposition, specifically the preposition of. So when we mention quantity inside of an adjective clause, we have the preposition clause next to the quantifier. So then our phrases or our quantifying phrases inside of our adjective clauses look something like this: some of, many of, most of, none of, two of, half of, both of, neither of, all of, several of, a few of, little of, and a number of, etc. So you get the picture. So it's an expression of quantity that it's combined with a preposition. So expressions of quantities also typically combine with specific pronouns. So it doesn't mean that they can combine with any of the ones that we've listed so far that are characteristic of adjective clauses, but that expressions of quantity typically possess either whom, which, or whose. Okay? And also important to know that the use of adjective clauses with quantifiers, like the ones that we've discussed, is most common in writing, but in conversational speech, in day-to-day interactions, it's less common. So, for instance, the example that we mentioned in our last class, Tolkien, all of whose books are popular, is a great writer. So all of whose books are popular is our adjective clause that has the quantifying phrase. And again, it's a lot formal. So I want you to do for that exercises in page 285, 2 to 4. So not that much, but we'll continue adding up some exercises as the class goes on. So let me hide myself. Adjective clauses, clause pronouns can also be used as the object of a preposition. So far we've been discussing adjective clauses in terms of them occurring alongside a noun or very close to the noun in a clause, right? So next to the noun, but they can also modify a preposition or occur next to a preposition. So the uses of prepositions in adjective clauses. In very formal English, the preposition comes at the beginning of the adjective clause. But in everyday usage, the preposition comes after the subject and verb of the adjective clause. So whenever we're combining prepositions inside an adjective clause, it really depends on the context that the communication is taking place, because most formal would be to have both the adjective relative pronoun and the preposition at the beginning, but informal would be to have it at the beginning and also at the end. And we'll see some examples right now. So that is the TV show about which I told you, formal. About is our preposition combined with our relative pronoun which, right? And about which I told you is our adjective clause. She is the woman about whom I told you. Again, we mentioned last class that whom is also quite formal. It's a formal relative pronoun. And again, about preposition and our relative pronoun are next to each other. So both of these instances are examples of a formal structure. But then our later two examples, that is a TV show that I told you about. You're ending a sentence with a preposition, right? Which is kind of taboo in standard language or in academic language. So it's considered more informal, but it's also most common in everyday conversations. So notice how it's sort of like it has a circular effect. So that I told you about is the adjective clause. That is our preposition. Sorry, that is our adjective pronoun, and about is our preposition, and about is occurring at the end. She is the woman who I told you about. Again, about is at the end, preposition at the end, and our clue relative pronouns at the beginning. And in brackets in all of these sentences is what would count as the adjective clause, all of this. It's not just the words that are highlighted. It's everything in brackets is the adjective clause. And you know that prepositions communicate space and time. So we have with, at, from, into, during, including, until, against, among, throughout, of, to, in, for, on, by, towards, upon, about, over, under, within, across, above, and a bunch of others, right? I don't need to tell you that, but in case you forgot. So adjective clauses with prepositions. So these are some of the examples that are quite common in our Azar book. These exercises that tell us to join two separate sentences and form a sentence that has an independent clause component and a dependent clause component. So that we would convert the following two sentences into one with a subordinate clause. So she is the woman I told you about her. She is the woman about whom I told you about. So that's informal, and it uses a preposition and it uses who. She's the woman whom I told you about. She's the woman that I told you about. She's the woman and nothing I told you about. So these are all the different ways, alternations that we can have to talk about woman. And notice the pattern of the preposition occurring. So if it occurs at the beginning, it's formal. But then if it occurs at the beginning, it doesn't need to occur at the end. But in these instances, about is at the end. So about is much more informal. So we have different positionalities or different potential positions for a preposition inside of an adjective clause. The music was good. We listened to it last night. The music to which we listened last night was good. So again, this is the kind of example that has a sentence or a clause inside a larger clause. So instead of it neatly following the independent clause, she is the woman, SVO, and then adjective clause, here we have it in the middle. So usually it's also good to think about how a lot of these examples have linking verbs. So the music to which we listened last night was good. The music which we listened to last night was good. The music that we listened to last night was good. The music we listened to last night was good. So again, here we have the occurrence of to at the beginning, no to at the end, but here we have which, split, and to is following our verb. Again, here to, so it's more informal. And also notice how which is used with the noun music, because which is used for thing. That is also used for thing, but as we saw in our previous example, both who and that can also refer to people. So that can refer to people and thing, but who is for people. And then we can omit in both instances our use of relative clause. If the preposition comes at the beginning of the adjective clause, only whom or which may be used, and that's a rule. So a preposition is never immediately followed by that or who, and that's a rule. So you can never have the music to that we listened last night was good at the beginning. So at the beginning, only a preposition can only combine with whom or which, but not with that or who. Okay? And then you do exercise 3 in page 269, 8 to 10. Okay, now we're moving on. Usual and unusual patterns of adjective clauses. So in everyday speech, people have different ways of saying things, and certain patterns of adjective clauses are more popular or more common than others in informal everyday contexts. So for instance, when talking about a person, the subject pronoun who is more popular than the subject pronoun that. Okay, so we tend to reserve who for people. That tends to be more popular than which. So especially, I guess if you consider Latino speakers, they also use that a lot. But that is more popular than which. And remember, which is reserved for things. But object pronouns omitted are probably more popular or most popular than using pronouns like who, which, that when speaking. So usual. I like the people who live next to me. Less usual. I like the people that live next to me. Usual. I like the books that have good plans. So here we have that, and books can happen together because it's a thing. But which can happen with books tends to be less usual. Usual. I like the people I met last night. Usual. I like the book I read last night. So in both cases, when talking about people and books, omitting the relative pronoun altogether is very common. Okay? So now we're going to talk about the use of the relative pronoun whose. So when we use whose is used to indicate possession. So the same way that pronouns his, her, its, their are used as adjectives, whose is also connected to a pronoun, sorry, to a noun. So his bicycle, bicycle's a noun, his is being used as a possessive adjective. So we can say whose bicycle, her composition, whose composition. So whose is connected to the noun. It's always going to be next to the noun. So we have the combination whose plus noun, and they're typically placed at the beginning of an adjective clause. And whose, when we're talking about possession, cannot be omitted like other relative pronouns that we've discussed. Why? Because it's communicating the meaning of possession, and the meaning of possession is not implicit. It's not obvious. You have to state it. I know the man whose wallet was stolen. You can't say, I know the man wallet was stolen. Like what? Sounds like two sentences in one, and two different ideas. So you really need whose. I know the man whose wallet, so here we have our whose in combination with a noun, was stolen. So this whole thing in bracket is our adjective clause. The student whose research paper I read writes well. So whose research paper I read is our adjective clause in the middle. Whose is next to the noun research paper. Okay? Whose typically modifies people, but as we saw in our previous example, it can also be used to modify things. So you can say, for instance, Carlos has a car whose value, so the value of the car is inestimable, rather than Carlos is inestimable, it's the car. So here we're using whose value to talk about a thing, but it's less common. And we also have adjective clause pronouns like where. So where describes a place like a city, country, room, house, whatever. So if where is used, then a preposition doesn't need to be included. In fact, if it is included, it's not grammatical. So where is used, a preposition is not used in the adjective clause. So for instance, the National Gallery where she works is very old. The National Gallery in which she works is very old. And notice how here we have a preposition, but it's because which is being used and not where. The National Gallery which she works at is very old. Here again, we're describing space, but the word is which. So at, the preposition can also be at the end. That she works at, the National Gallery that she works at is very old. Here we have at the end, another different relative adjective pronoun here. The National Gallery, nothing she works at is very old. So notice again where, if where is there, then nothing else is needed in terms of preposition to talk about space. Then the same way that we talk about space, where, we also use the pronoun when to talk about time in an adjective clause, year, day, century, etc. So prepositions are used for an adjective clause expressing time, can be used before which. However, if it is not that pronoun, then the preposition is omitted. Again, this is a rule of when a preposition is permissible or not. So let's read that bit again. So prepositions in an adjective clause expressing time can be used before which. So we can say to which, at which, in which. However, it is not, if it's not which, then we don't combine the pronoun with that preposition. So I'll never forget the day when I met you. So see, we don't have a preposition here. We just have when. I'll never forget the day on which, here we have which, on which I met you. I'll never forget the day that I met you. So you don't have a preposition here. I'll never forget the day I met you, which has nothing and doesn't have a preposition. So again, which is the one that, if used to communicate time, combines with a preposition. And for that, you'll do exercise 16 into page 278, 7 to 10. So for Canvas by Friday, these are the exercises that I said that I would like from you. And you have until 11:59 p.m. to upload them. And that is the end of today's lecture.